Everything's running. Okay. So, first off, yeah, like I said, it's a real honor to get to talk to you. I've been looking forward to this all week. Um, I actually I've taken a lot of inspiration from your show, What Would You Do? And I kind of have come up with the concept of something that I wanted to start a show called Is This Where You Want to Be? Where I look at a person's life from past, present, and into the future on what they've done and what they plan on doing. And so
Yeah,
I was hoping you would be okay with being the honorary first guest on the show.
of course. Now you're a talk show host, right?
Well, it's as close as I'm going to get.
It all starts small, you know?
Yes.
Uh,
Um, so what I wanted to start with is you were born in San Antonio,
right.
and I believe you're a fifth generation San Antonio.
I think, my uncles tell me that the family's been there 7 generations. So it's a long time. Texas was once part of Spain. It was once part of Mexico. And like I tell folks, when they ask me when my family came from Mexico, we were always there. I tell folks, we didn't cross the border crossed us. Yeah.
And then you also moved around to Michigan and Ohio, and I've watched, in preparation for this, I've watched plenty of interviews that you've done. And you said that you didn't have the easiest childhood necessarily.
It was really tough growing up in San Antonio. Like a lot of families, we struggled. My father had to drop out of the 3rd grade to pick cotton in South Texas. My mother worked at the high school cafeteria, and she dropped out of school in the 8th grade. So even though the family had been there many generations, they still had to work hard, and they weren't well off by any means.
Mm-hmm.
So they they couldn't finish school. And because of that, I had to, growing up, we grew up in a poor neighborhood, and I had to help out where I could. So as a kid, I would shine shoes on the streets of San Antonio at the age of 8 years old. Wow. My first job, and then I was a stock boy at the corner grocery store. And then when I was 13 years old, we were migrant farm workers. So we did what a lot of Latino families in South Texas did back then. We joined a caravan of migrant farm workers and we journeyed 1,700 miles to Northport, Michigan to pick cherries. My father, my sister, my 2 sisters, and my mom in the back of these trucks. And then we followed the crops after 2 months of picking cherries in Northport, Michigan. We followed the crops down to Ohio, where we picked tomatoes. So it was tough. And I didn't speak English when I was 6 years old. Right. I remember the first grade of school, I came home at recess time because I thought the school day was over, and it was only 10 o'clock in the morning, but I just didn't understand. But it's a story of, you overcome all those obstacles, and somehow my mother taught me to believe in myself, and she taught me that I was just as good as, the kids who lived on the rich part of town, and I persevered.
That was actually one thing I wanted to bring up is you in all the interviews that I've seen, and especially in the show What Would You Do, you have a very large amount of optimism, and I was kind of wondering where that comes from, especially because again, in one of the interviews that I saw, you said that in high school they were trying to encourage you to be a mechanic or wood shop, that kind of stuff, just because you fell under the typical Mexican American stereotype.
Right.
So I was wondering not only where does the general optimism come from, but the optimism to break out of that and try and be, as good of a journalist as you've become.
Well, I surrounded myself, and I say surrounded, when really I only had one good buddy who was my best friend. So at the age of 13, 14, we would hang out together, and he would say, John, we can do it. He was Mexican American, and his family had just come over from Mexico when he was a kid. He was first generation. So I surrounded myself with people who believed like I do, who were very positive. And then, of course, as I've said, my mother, who was my greatest inspiration, she didn't speak much English, but boy, she would show up at the PTA meetings at the school and argue for her son. If I was held after school, or if my grades weren't up to par, or if I was getting disciplined, she was there. She was very involved in my life, and she loved me tremendously. So a lot of what I did in my young years and then throughout my career was to try to impress her and try to be proud, make her proud of her son. Mm-hmm. So I think that in large part has to do with my optimism. I went to church. We were very Catholic. My mother was very religious. Mm-hmm. I don't go to church now as much as I should, perhaps, but I think having religion in your background also helps you maintain that optimism.
All right, and moving out of your or out of your school years and now kind of starting your journalism career, you actually have accredited being of Hispanic origin as to helping you get your first job, which I think is something that, or I'm sorry, maybe not get your first job, but land a good job in the media.
In the network, at ABC News. I mean, every local reporter's job is to someday get to the networks. It's like going from the minor leagues to the major leagues, right? And I was a local reporter in Chicago, where I started my television career as a reporter covering the blizzards and covering local politics, traffic accidents, whatever. My dream was to someday get to the networks. And Central America, back in the 80s, when I was a young reporter in Chicago, Central America was blowing up. There were all these civil wars going on in Nicaragua and El Salvador and Panama. And the networks were looking for somebody who could go down there and speak the language and cover those stories. The guy that I replaced, a reporter by the name of Bill Stewart for ABC News, was shot and killed on camera by soldiers.
Wow.
Simply, in large part, because he couldn't communicate with the soldiers, right? And the networks, in all their wisdom, then said, we should hire Hispanic reporters to come cover this region. And I was one of the lucky ones, some might say unlucky ones, to be called upon and to be offered the job to work for Peter Jennings as a reporter covering Central America. It was a dream come true. But yes, in large part because I spoke the language and because I looked the part, I could go places, Sam, in Central America where I wouldn't be so easily spotted and identified as an American reporter because of the way I look. And I used that to my advantage. I could sort of blend in, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So that I might not be so easily targeted, because often journalists were targeted. So that had a lot to do with my first job, being Latino.
I actually did have a question that was related to your time in Panama. Again, going off of another interview that I watched. Believe me when I say I've watched hours in preparation for this.
Thank you, man.
You talk about being in a hostage situation in Panama, and it was one of the, I would assume, scarier times in your career.
It was the scariest time, yeah.
Certainly, in the moment, it's very scary, but looking back, does that kind of in-the-moment rush, is that something that you look forward to as a journalist, or is it something that you would rather never face again?
I have to admit that when you're in the middle of all this and you're 28, 29 years old and you're trying to make a name for yourself and you love journalism and you love that front row seat to world events, it is a rush. It's almost like an adrenaline rush where you want to be there. You want to be in the middle of it. Even today, when I hear of a big story like an earthquake, God forbid, in Mexico or Latin America, and I covered many of them, or a hurricane, as we're experiencing right now in Florida. I covered many of them. The reporter's instinct in me makes me want to be there and want to be covering that story. In Panama, it was the scariest time because the soldiers were coming after reporters. And they took 40 American reporters hostage from our hotel in Panama City, Panama. The U.S. had invaded in 1989 a military operation called Operation Just Cause. President Bush, the elder President Bush, was out to get the dictator from Panama, this man, Manuel Noriega. And when the U.S. invaded, their soldiers in Panama started grabbing Americans hostage to use as leverage in case their leader, Manuel Noriega, was taken hostage by the Americans, was captured by the Americans. So they held 40 journalists hostage, and they took them from our hotel. I was hiding out in my room with my producer, Robert Campos, and sure enough, at one point, the soldiers came into the hotel and took him. I was up on a higher floor talking to Peter Jennings on the phone, and I wasn't taken, but Robert was. And that was the longest night of my career, just hiding under the bed, hoping that they didn't come after me.
That certainly seems like in the moment scary situation.
And by the way, Robert was later released about 24 hours, as most of the journalists who were captured were released a day or two later, unharmed, thank God.
Yeah. And one just more little detail that I wanted to touch on was your name originally actually is Juan Quinones.
Yeah.
And then you changed it to John. Was that on your part, or was there any pressure to Americanize the name?
You know what? It happened in school, not before I even came to television. And in many ways, I kind of wish I still went by Juan Manuel Quinones. But in school, my teachers, who wanted to anglicize everyone's name in the third grade, just said, "You're Johnny, and that's going to be your name." So I should have maybe fought it as I got older, but it stuck, and that's how people knew me. But it's John Quinones. I always make a big effort, though, to pronounce Quinones in the Spanish way it should be.
And so now moving on from the past.
The networks, to make it clear, no one ever in television told me change your name and anglicize it. No, I never faced that kind of pressure.
Okay. To move on from the past and now into the present, you are, of course, the host of one of my favorite TV shows and hit TV show, ABC's What Would You Do? You're in your 10th season now, and over 10 seasons, have you run into any situation where, because one common thing that you do is you have to be the person who goes in and breaks the situation up. Have you ever run into a situation where it's been too extreme and you personally have just said, we can't even air this?
Fortunately, no. The only thing and only a very few programs or scenarios that we've not aired are those where nothing really happened, not enough people showed up, and it wasn't worth, putting on the air. And that was only one or two cases out of 500 scenarios that we've done. We try to break the scene before it gets too crazy. So there's a real art to being able to stop things before they blow up out of proportion, out of control. Mm-hmm. Also, when I'm filming the show, we have a security guard who is in the middle of it all in plain clothes. And if I can't get there fast enough and things, let's say someone wants to swing at the actor or the yelling gets out of control or it looks like it could get dangerous, then the security guard stands up and says, "Hey, it's part of a show. It's what would you do?" But fortunately, we've been able to maintain control throughout, and it's been 10 years. I shudder to think what would happen if it ever got violent, because the fact is it could. I mean, somebody could pull a knife or a gun, and that would be the end of this TV show.
And that's one thing that I wanted to dig into on a separate topic is I'm not sure how much you watch YouTube or are involved in the YouTube community. I know the show uploads to YouTube.
Sure.
But there are several amateurs, in a sense, that are trying to do a social experiment TV show like you do. And while a majority of them are indeed fake, and they also hire actors to accomplish the experiment, it could lead to a scenario that is violent or does get out of control, and they're not properly trained to handle it. What is your opinion on the non-professionals? Do you think that shows like What Would You Do are meant strictly for TV and controlled environments, or I wouldn't say do you support, but are you okay with the YouTube version of it, the amateur?
No, I worry about those more amateurish approaches. Some of them are really amazing, and the reactions they've gotten that I've seen them post are truly impressive, both good and bad. It reminds us there's a lot of work to be done when it comes to race and religion and discrimination in this country. We've made a lot of progress, but we got work to do, and that's what we found with our show. And I see that with these YouTube versions of the show. You should know that before we even broach a theme for one of our scenarios, we have to clear it with our lawyers here at ABC News, by the way, which is owned by Disney. There are some strict parameters on what we can and cannot do, what we can have our actors say or not say. And before we even go to that diner or that park to film the show, everything is reviewed by our ABC News lawyers here. And as much as we argue with them all the time about wanting to do more, I'm glad that they're there, because they remind us that things can be dangerous. And I'm sure those other kids doing the program on YouTube aren't clearing it with anyone. They're doing this on their own, and it can be dangerous. Someone could pull a gun on them or a knife. We have a security guy on the set, with us, as I mentioned, plain clothes in the middle of the action. We have a team of about 30 people, and we all discuss the scenarios among ourselves. This is not just my show. I don't decide, I'm going to let it play on forever. I have producers who then say, John, I think we should really end it now.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a communal approach to doing the show, and even though I am the main guy and the face of it, there's a lot of other people involved.
Amazingly enough, we've already reached. This was only supposed to be a 15-minute Skype call.
Go on, that's fine.
Okay, cool. That's what I was worried about. I was like, I have so much to ask, and I know that this is going to be more than 15 minutes. I now kind of want to move into some more in-depth topics. I guess maybe one more question about what would you do.
Sure.
For my diversity in media class, I'm currently enrolled at Shippensburg University, a brother of Lambda Chi Alpha, as you are.
All right, my brother.
I am currently enrolled at Shippensburg University. I'm a journalism major, and for my diversity in media class, we watched plenty of What Would You Do clips. And
Wow.
really just, how does it feel knowing that a TV show that you're a part of, that you have a lot to say in, is used all over the country to help teach diversity?
I'm very honored. I'm very honored by that. Who would have thought? I mean, when we started this show, we thought, we can do one scenario or three little scenarios. It was part of 2020. It was really the kicker piece on 2020 at the end of the magazine show. And then producers asked me at ABC, do you think you could do 1 hour, an entire hour with What Would You Do's? And we said, yeah, I think we can. And then they said it did very well in the ratings. Can we do 3 hours? Or can you do 6 hours? And here we are doing 13 hours now for the new season. We're going to end this Friday, but then we'll be back in January and next summer with another 13 hours. So, I mean, look, it makes me proud because these issues that we're highlighting really do happen in real life. They maybe not to the extent, and folks aren't as loud in the diner as we make them out to be because we want to attract attention. But these are all issues that really happen in day-to-day lives about discrimination against Latinos and Muslims and Jewish people and black folks. It happens, and I am very proud to be able to shine a light on these issues that happen in real life, but they happen in the shadows. Here's an opportunity that we have, What Would You Do, to bring it to light. And what makes me the proudest is when a gay young man comes up to me, for example, at the airport and says, thanks to your show, I was able to come out to my parents. We watched your gay scenario, and they then understood, my parents understood what it's like and what I'm all about, whether it's a transgender child or a lesbian young woman or a homosexual young man. We're shining a light on these issues. Muslim folks come to me all the time saying, we face that kind of discrimination that you showed on that broadcast all the time. So when I see that, that is the most redeeming thing of all.
It certainly, it made not only that class a lot easier to get through, getting to watch a form of entertainment, but the show does highlight a lot of stuff that I don't think even the most accepting of people could even think of. So it really is a beneficial program. Now
I'm glad that not only universities but high schools use tapes of the program, recordings of the program all the time. The show is watched now thanks to YouTube all over the world. So I get tweets and emails all the time saying, please bring the show to Great Britain or Australia or Turkey. Because we want you to shine a light of What Would You Do on the issues facing us. So I thought about that. I thought that, wouldn't it be wonderful to take the show international? The language may be an issue, but it still, I think, would be fascinating.
Oh, for sure. Now straying away from What Would You Do and just more into journalism in general. One thing that we've kind of already touched on, but this actually is a question coming from my sister, because I asked if she or if any of my friends had anything that they'd like for me to bring up. And where do you see journalism today when race is involved? Do you believe it's best used to diffuse a situation, or do you believe in most ways it only fans the flames?
No, I think it's absolutely, when you have a better understanding of a certain segment of the community in this country, particularly the minority communities, I think you'll get a better story out of it. Not that the Hispanic reporter covering a Hispanic community will come out with a biased view because he happens to be Latino, but because he understands that community. He's able to speak the language. I tell the story all the time of how Peter Jennings one time told me, the great anchorman at ABC, when I was upset that the president of Nicaragua, Daniel Ortega, had told me he wasn't going to give me the big exclusive interview that he had promised me.
Mm-hmm.
I had to call ABC and tell them that the story that was going to be on the air that they thought, Peter Jennings thought was going to be on the air, I wouldn't be able to deliver. So I expected to be yelled at or fired by ABC because here I was now not able to deliver the story that I had been promised. And Peter Jennings said to me, John, don't worry so much about talking to the movers and the shakers of the world. Talk to the moved and the shaken. In other words, talk to the real people. Mm-hmm. You as a Latino reporter can go into Nicaragua or El Salvador or Mexico or Guatemala or Costa Rica, and you can come back with a story that perhaps someone else who doesn't speak the language, who doesn't look like you, won't be able to bring back because he can't gain the confidence that you as a Latino can get by going into those communities thanks to the language you speak and the color of your skin. So I think in the end, many of the Emmys won. I won 7 national Emmy Awards at ABC. Many of those awards that I've won are from stories that I did in the Dominican Republic and in Colombia, South America, and in the Amazon, in Venezuela, and Brazil, in large part because of who I am and the way I look. And I think all of us as reporters, whether it doesn't have to be a race thing, if you have a background or a knowledge of medicine that makes you better at covering the medical community, if you're a former teacher who understands education better than any other reporter, you can cover the education beat. As a medical person, you can cover the medical beat. It just gives you an edge. So I think more diversity in media means better understanding of all the communities in this country.
That's one thing that we stressed very heavily. And speaking of diversity, I'm sorry, that we stressed heavily in my diversity of media class. Definitely want to finish that sentence.
Yep.
One thing, a very current event that I think, especially getting your opinion as a minority on, would be very interesting is what's happening with Collin Kaepernick and refusing to stand for the national anthem.
Wow. Yeah.
It's something that I'm kind of on the fence on because on one side, he's choosing a peaceful way of protesting, and it's something that in today's society you really don't see as often. Whereas I do agree with the other side that's saying, there are people not only in America but minorities as well who have lived and died for that flag. And
sure.
So I don't side with either. I see an argument both ways, and I was wondering, with you as a minority, where do you stand on that, or what's your opinion on it?
It's not something that I would ever do. I'm very thankful of every opportunity that this country has afforded me. Is it a perfect country? Have I never experienced discrimination? No, I can't say that. Right. But I can't hold the entire country or the government of this great nation responsible for the actions of a few people. So, by and large, for this Latino reporter who grew up in poverty in the barrios of San Antonio, shining shoes and picking tomatoes and cherries in Michigan and Ohio, for this kid to have his dream come true of being a network journalist blows the mind. And I am forever grateful for that. Having said that, his constitutional right, Collin's constitutional right, is to do that.
Right.
And this is how he chooses to shine a light. You and I might do it through journalism, right? By going into certain areas and exposing stories that need to be brought to light. He's chosen to shine a light on it by his actions in front of these millions of fans of football. I wouldn't do it that way. I think he's going to catch a lot more flack than he's gotten so far. I mean, people are already burning his jersey throughout his community. And but having said that, I think he has a right to do that. He just better be ready for the repercussions.
The one thing that I've truly thought needs to be at least needs to have some light shed on it with the situation is, at the very least, what he's doing is peaceful and not violent in nature, because especially lately with corrupt police officers, or police officers who did do the right thing and unfortunately just were caught in a bad situation, there's been so much violence going on, and so for him to choose a peaceful way of doing it, while maybe I don't agree with it, it is at least good in that aspect.
Yeah, I think people should try to understand where this is coming from. I think it comes from a good place. He, as a person of color, has encountered things that perhaps a white person in this country never has and never will, thank God. But, we do scenarios on race all the time. What do you do if you're at a store and somebody's following around an African-American shopper simply because he's African-American, simply because of the color of his skin, suspecting that they're going to steal something? It's a what would you do scenario, right? What would you do if somebody doesn't want to serve a Latino at a diner because he's not speaking English? When you endure that kind of discrimination, racism, then you're coming from a place that has experiences that maybe the rest of the country has not. So let's not be so darn critical of what he's encountered. Yes, he's got it made now. He's making millions. He's very successful. But to his credit, he hasn't forgotten what it's like for a lot of people who are of his color who still suffer in this country.
That's a very good way of putting it. I only have about 2 questions left.
Sure.
One of them I'll discuss off of the recording because it involves personal information.
Sure.
But last one, at least for the sake of the recording, would be in a final interview that I watched. It was with the YouTube channel Brookdale TV. You mentioned that if people were to take a step back, take a deep breath, society would be just a lot calmer than it normally is. And, unfortunately nowadays with social media, just the way the world works, taking that deep breath and that step back is very difficult. So personally, just coming from you, in what way do you take that deep breath, or do you take that step back, or is it something that, especially with your experience in journalism, you've done so long, it almost comes naturally now?
Look, we all judge by appearances, right? And today, more than ever, you point out very well that through social media, we react so quickly. I mean, we shoot from the hip before even asking questions. So we all judge by appearances. You do it, and I do it too. We're not perfect.
Right.
The moment we see something that might be frightening, the hair on the back of your head stands up. And the experts will tell us that it's embedded in our DNA, that ever since the caveman days, an instinct told us when we were out hunting for the next piece of meat for the family in the cave, if we witnessed something that was threatening to your life, it was the old fight or flee, right, response. So it's embedded in us. We're quick to judge, and we size people up quickly by the color of their skin and the accent in their voice, the way they're dressed, and we make assumptions. And so often we are wrong about those assumptions. So when I say step back and take a breath, all we have to do, and it's not my idea, the experts will tell us this, is pause for a moment. And before you react so quickly in judging other people, say to yourself, why am I thinking the worst of this person solely because of the way he looks? And if you just count to 10 and you see that other person as someone just like you, with the same dreams and wants and wishes for his family, for himself, that you have, then you will be much more likely to see him as just a fellow human being, and so much less likely to presume the worst and make assumptions that may well be wrong. And that's what I mean by just stop and think for a moment.
Yeah, no, I think that's a lot of insight. It's actually, when I heard it in the interview, I was like, that is probably one of the best pieces of advice I think we could give anybody nowadays, is to just take a step back and
just take a breath and stop and think. Politicians today aren't doing that very well. They're just blurting out whatever they think, and it's hurtful, and unfortunately, when you're in a position of power, other people might agree with you. I mean, well, he said it, and he knows, and he's on television, or he's running for president. Then if he can say it, then he must be right. If he can make those assumptions, and that's not true. We're all human. We all can make mistakes, and we can be so wrong.
Mm-hmm. Like I said, I have one more question for after the recording, but for the sake of the recording, I want to say thank you again very much for doing this. It
Thank you,
really
Sam.
was an honor.
Uh,